Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris, watching NBC News Now. Here's what's happening. The internet literally broke today, or at least it felt that way early this morning. What took out some of the world's biggest websites? California's climate emergency, 100% of the Golden State dealing with a drought, what that means for farmers.
This is a field that we would have planted melons if we had water. We don't have any water, so we don't plant.
And from she session to her turn, the founders of The Skim joining me live to talk about getting millennial women back to work after the pandemic. We start today with Vice President's trip to Mexico. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba is in Mexico City.
Hi there, Allison. Vice President Kamala Harris spent several hours with the Mexican President López Obrador discussing a range of topics. Most of their conversation focused on the issue of migration at the U.S.-Mexico border, an area both countries see as an opportunity for them to work together and try to help the Northern Triangle countries. Of course, the Vice President just coming from one of them, Guatemala, yesterday. They're hoping that together, pledging much money and some other assistance, that perhaps they can chip away at some of the poverty, the violence, the corruption that drives so many migrants to leave their countries and then undertake that very perilous journey all the way up through Mexico and finally reaching the border. But we are waiting to see what other kinds of commitments may have come out of this two-day trip. We know that the Vice President, for instance, is committed to working on an anti-corruption task force. That's something that was announced. And then we also know that, of course, the United States is pledging some vaccines as part of their global diplomatic effort to get more shots in arms worldwide, given how many the United States has. But some of the thornier issues here that have come up in the last few hours or so, Allison, the Vice President making waves in that exclusive interview with Lester Holt when she didn't directly answer why she hasn't gone to the border to see the conditions for herself. That's something Republicans have called for, and she has said that she doesn't want to focus on the grand gestures. Instead, that's why she wanted to come to these countries in particular, see what's driving people to make the trek in person and to really understand it from this end of things, working with the governments before going to the U.S.-Mexico border, which is something she still could do. They left the door open, but they didn't make any commitments on that front. And then the other thing is this very intense warning and message that she sent yesterday to these migrants saying, please do not come, wanting to make the conditions in their home countries more favorable. That was already knocked down by some progressives like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who said it was disappointing to see that kind of language. So that's some of the tightrope that she's really walking here in Mexico, where she's also set to meet with some female entrepreneurs, some labor leaders, before she's set to hold a press availability and take some questions from us, we hope, later this afternoon before she heads back to Washington.
Thousands of migrants who try to cross the border into the U.S. are being returned almost immediately to Reynosa, one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico. Tents there are now filled with families trying to decide whether they should send their kids alone to the United States. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez is in Reynosa with more on the crisis there. Gabe, we see the tents behind you. Tell us more about what you're seeing there.
Hey there, Allison. Well, this is a new bottleneck at the border. This is a migrant tent camp that has sprung up in Reynosa, Mexico, really at the plaza at the center of the city, this crime-ridden city. And there are safety concerns about the migrants here. But as you can see, the thing that really strikes us when we're here and we're looking around, so many children. I mean, right here, they're playing soccer. There's many tents all around here. As you can see, several hundred migrants are now calling this camp home. And nearby shelters that we visited are also at capacity. They're trying to expand as well. Now, many of the families that we've met here have actually been returned here to Mexico from the United States when they tried to cross over because of what's known as Title 42, COVID protocols that were put in place by the Trump administration that the Biden administration has also kept in place. Some of the families here we've been speaking with are facing a very difficult decision, Allison, on whether to send their minor children to the United States alone because they know that the Biden administration's policy policy of allowing unaccompanied minors to stay will keep them in the U.S., perhaps allowing them to reunite with relatives. Now, these are cramped conditions here. It's very hot here. You can see these tarps protecting these migrants during the day. We spoke with an immigrant advocate who actually gave up her life savings, Allison, to start what's called a sidewalk school here. It's an NGO that teaches migrant kids here. And excuse me, as this tarp blows on top of me right now, but we asked her about one of her biggest concerns here inside the camp. Take a listen. How dangerous can it be?
2 weeks ago, there were 6 kidnappings in one night. So in kidnapping, they come onto the plaza, they drag a person off, you hear the person screaming for help. Everyone stands around and watches, which is understandable. No one wants to die. People have their own children that they need to look out for. And then they put the person in their truck and they drive off.
So, Allison, that is what some of these migrants are facing right now at this camp. 2 weeks ago, you just heard her say 6 kidnappings in one night. Certainly many safety concerns for these migrants, and for many of them, they don't know where they're going next. They have absolutely nothing here, and they're trying to decide what to do with their children in tow. Allison?
Gabe, you mentioned many of these migrant families are being sent back to Mexico under Title 42, the COVID protocols that the Trump administration put in place. But immigration advocates are also pinning some of the blame on the Biden administration. What are they saying? What's going on right now that they're not happy about?
Well, Felicia, who you just heard from, said she was frustrated with the Biden administration for not lifting Title 42 and allowing more families to await their asylum proceedings in the U.S. The Biden administration has not done that. Now, earlier you mentioned, I heard Monica talking about how the vice president has faced some criticism for not coming to the U.S.-Mexico border, choosing to focus instead, she says, on the root causes of this migration. Well, you know, this is the reality here at the border, and it's extremely complex. As you know, Allison, it's not just due to the Biden administration's policy shift, although that does play a role because some of these migrants believe that it is now easier to get into the United States. That's largely due to human smugglers that are telling them this and are feeding them misinformation. There's many factors here, as you know, Allison. There's, hurricanes in Central America that really devastated the region. Some of the families we've spoken with tell me that here. Another woman from Honduras says that 2 family members were just murdered earlier this year, and she's desperate to get here. But the major question right now, Allison, is, that with Kamala Harris, the vice president, and as well as President Biden over the last few months, saying repeatedly, do not come. They have made that message very clear to the migrants here. However, are they listening, and is the message getting across? And from the ones that we have spoken with, no, it isn't getting across. The information they're hearing is from smugglers back home in Central America, and they are feeding them that misinformation, and they are heartbroken when they get here, and it is not as easy to get into the United States as they were led to believe. Allison?
Yeah, and on top of that, just how bad things are at home, that they feel they have to take that dangerous journey, take their chances, and end up somewhere like that. Gabe, thank you so much for your reporting today. What did they know, and more importantly, what did they do about it? A new Senate report says Capitol Police did not act on warnings that Trump supporters would breach the Capitol and target Democrats on January 6th. NBC News correspondent Ken Delaney in Washington, D.C. Ken, that report says the Capitol Police command system broke down during the riot. What does that mean, and what else have you learned from this new report?
Hey, Allison. Well, that's the most harrowing part of the report, actually, is all these quotes from rank-and-file Capitol Police officers who say they never heard from their leadership all while this was going on. While they were being attacked by armed protesters and trying to defend the Capitol, they felt totally abandoned. One person said, "Where's the plan?" And they were wondering where their leaders were. So that's what happened during the riot. But before the riot, the report also lays out the fact that the Capitol Police has 3 different intelligence bureaus, and they all had information that people were planning to do violence that day, including bringing weapons to the Capitol. They were looking at maps of tunnels. They were talking about targeting members of Congress, but they didn't pass that information either up the chain to the leaders of the Capitol Police or down the chain to the rank and file. And so the Capitol Police was utterly unprepared. But of course, Allison, the report goes far beyond just the Capitol Police and looks at the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI and questions why those institutions did not publish an intelligence bulletin, did not do anything with the threat information that they had about people planning to come to the Capitol January 6th and commit violence, Allison.
Ken, I know there are a lot of different organizations involved, but what are Capitol Police saying today? Do they agree with this report, or are they taking some issues with it?
Well, they are saying that they're trying to reform their institution, and they acknowledge that they have a lot of work to do, but they are taking issue specifically with the idea that there was intelligence that people wanted to attack the Capitol. And this is really at the heart of it, because Yogananda Pittman, who is the acting Capitol Police chief, comes in for a lot of criticism in this report, because at one point she told Congress that they knew that Congress was the target that day and that there was going to be violence. And then a few weeks later, she said, well, we really didn't have any reason to believe that 1,000 people would attack the Capitol. The point is, no one expected a mob of thousands to ransack the Capitol, but there was ample indications on social media that some hardcore extremists had a plan to come and stop the steal, as they put it. Well, where was the steal taking place in their mind? It was in the Capitol by members of Congress. Where did people think the violence was going to happen? And that's on the FBI, it's on DHS. That's one thing this report really doesn't get to, because they didn't get a lot of the records from the FBI, is why didn't the federal government know this was coming and take action to stop it, Allison?
So, Ken, how about looking forward and preventing something like this from happening again? Does this report lay out suggestions for fixing what went wrong, making sure the Capitol is more secure in the future?
It certainly does with respect to the Capitol Police. It has a number of recommendations, including something as simple as the Capitol Police chief should be able to call in the National Guard directly, which he or she cannot do right now. That's going to require, believe it or not, a change in the law. They also want to reform this sort of Byzantine Capitol Police board that oversees the force that includes the architect of the Capitol. But one thing that it doesn't get to, again, we're going back to the FBI, is this question of how does the FBI collect on domestic extremists? Can it look at social media? How do we solve that apparent gap and problem? This report doesn't get to that because they just didn't have the information, and they say they will continue to investigate that part of it, Allison.
All right, Ken Delanian, thanks so much. I feel like this is one we are going to continue to analyze for months, if not years to come. Thanks so much.
I think you're right. Yeah.
The Senate confirming President Biden's first judicial nominee, Julian Niels, as a New Jersey district judge. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer saying this is the first of many jurists the Democratic-led Senate will consider to restore the balance to the federal judiciary. NBC News national political reporter Sahil Kapoor is on Capitol Hill. Sahil, tell us about this first confirmation. Who is Julian Niels?
Allison, he's a lawyer in New Jersey. He was nominated by President Obama in his last 2 years and did not get a vote in the Senate that was then controlled by Republicans. He is the first official judicial nominee of President Biden who has been confirmed by the Senate. The second one, Regina Rodriguez, just got confirmed by the Senate moments ago. So Joe Biden now has 2 judges to his name. That is, of course, much, much lower than the 200-plus judges that former President Trump had confirmed in his 4 years. This is the beginning of a Democratic effort, what Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, calls an effort to restore the balance to the judiciary.
Former President Trump appointed 234 federal judges. I don't know all that much about federal judges, but that sure sounds like a lot, Sahil. How are Democrats really trying to reshape the courts under President Biden?
Well, firstly, they have a lot fewer vacancies than the former president did. One thing that Trump, mostly aided by his aides like Don McGahn in the White House and Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, was very effective at, was quickly confirming young conservative judges to the judiciary. That was their formula. Young, conservative, approved by, vetted by groups like the Federalist Society, so they know can have a kind of a strong inclination of how they would vote. Democrats are taking a different approach. They are deciding to nominate judges who are less, compared to history, who have backgrounds who are not quite as much corporate lawyers and prosecutors, more civil rights lawyers and public defenders. I would expect to see a lot more of that from the Biden White House in terms of the way they go forward. That is their project.
Sahil, judges only need a simple majority vote to pass in the Senate, but can Republicans do anything to block these nominees, to put up some sort of a fight here? What are their options?
No, they can't. They have to persuade Democrats. This is part of a new rule in the Senate that began in 2013 by Democrats and was completed in 2017 by Republicans. But there is no filibuster for judicial nominees on any court, including the Supreme Court. So if the 50 Democrats in the chamber stick together, they can confirm whoever they want without any Republican support. Of course, if any of them defect and Republicans stick together, then that judicial nominee would go down. So this is really a test at the end of the day to see how well Democrats can stick together. But of course, not every nominee is going to pass on a 50-50 vote or a 51-50 vote. Many of them are going to have at least some Republican supporters, Allison.
Sahil, you mentioned the Supreme Court. As we know, that bench is full, but some progressive activists are trying to change that. What are they doing?
They are trying to persuade Stephen Breyer, an 82-year-old appointee of Bill Clinton, to step down this year so that the Democratic president, while he has a Democratic Senate, can confirm a liberal successor. This is a 6-3 conservative court that Republicans have transformed in recent years. Now the most conservative Supreme Court in nearly a century. Democrats believe that they cannot take chances with the elder members on their liberal side, the three of them, and Breyer happens to be the oldest of them. So there is a campaign to try to get him to retire. So far, there's no indication that it's working. Breyer has not suggested in any way that he's planning to step down, but justices have a tendency to announce that at the end of the term, which is coming up just this summer. So stay tuned.
All right, we'll see if he decides to stay or decides to go, if they have any luck there. Sahil, thanks so much for reporting.
Thank you.
Some of the world's most traffic websites are back online after a cloud service outage this morning. Error messages like this one on Amazon, Reddit, the New York Times, the BBC, even the UK government website. Fastly, a U.S. cloud computing services provider, saying it fixed the issue within an hour. But what caused it? Let's bring in NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett. So, Maura, this happened around 6 a.m. Eastern. Have they figured out what went wrong?
Allison, this was a massive global internet outage, and the point of commonality here is that all those sites you mentioned use this service company, a cloud computing services company called Fastly, and that is why they were all affected this morning. The company told NBC News in a statement, quote, "We identified a service configuration that triggered disruptions across our points of presence globally and have disabled that configuration. Our global network is coming back online." And now their incident report update online says that all the services have been recovered and the incident has been resolved, but they do warn that customers using these sites might experience some slower activity than normal, Allison.
So, Maura, tell us more about Fastly, because I think one of the big questions people have this morning, who are those guys and what do they do that put them in a position to take down so many major sites?
Right. So Fastly is an American cloud computing services firm, and it operates what's called a content delivery network. So I know that's kind of wonky. What exactly does that mean? Basically, they have servers and data centers abroad that house American images and videos that a lot of these sites need to use in order to get American content to somewhere like Europe a little faster, for example. So that's why we see all of these major sites using this type of company, Allison.
Maura, I'm sure most of our viewers have used at least one of the sites in question here. They are major players. Should people be concerned about their personal data or personal security?
So this definitely highlights how critical and how fragile the internet infrastructure is right now, because all this stuff that happens behind the scenes ultimately impacts people like us that use these sites. So when it comes to personal data, right now there's no indication that there's any bad actors involved and that people need to be concerned about their personal security. The CEO of Fastly actually told Wall Street Journal this morning that there was not, and there's no evidence right now that it was connected to any cyber attack. So that's the good news on this end for now, and everything is back up and running. Mostly normal right now, Allison.
All right. Quite a scare, though. We have been so concerned about cyber hacks and attacks. Maura, thank you so much for filling us in. Let's check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She has the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Hey, Simone.
Hey, Allison. Well, we're going to start with yet another ransomware attack. Almost feels like we're having one of these every single day. But this time, the target is iConstituent, an online vendor providing communication services to the House of Representatives. Now, a spokesperson for the House says they're not aware of an impact on their data and are taking preventative measures. Well, Bitcoin's price sliding 7% today, possibly over security concerns. U.S. officials recovering most of the ransom paid to the Colonial Pipeline hackers. Now, they accessed a hacker's central account and seized $2.3 million in Bitcoin, the digital currency up about 14% this year. Well, former Kansas City Chiefs assistant coach Britt Reed pleading not guilty to a DWI charge after he crashed and seriously injured a 5-year-old girl. The judge allowing him to resume driving with restrictions, and no trial date is set just yet. Well, carbon dioxide levels are now 50% higher than they were before the industrial age began. The average rate of increase is faster than ever, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Pandemic lockdowns weren't enough to make a significant difference there. And the first item in Kanye West's Yeezy Gap line is already sold out. Surprise, surprise. The $200 blue puffer jacket that you see right there was released for pre-orders today, and it sold out within hours. It's unclear when this team up will release other items. Here's the thing, Allison, that I don't understand about these collaborations. You buy one of these blue puffer jackets, you go out on the street, you're going to see hundreds of others.
I can't wait to walk down the street of the city and see all those blue puffer jackets like moving by.
Seriously, just one herd, just herd mentality right there.
I heard of blue puff jackets. We'll see you in an hour.
Yep.
100% of California is now in a drought, and if you could believe it, it could get even worse. Farmers in the state looking for a lifeline. Thousands of their acres of land dried up. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson is in Orville, California. Steve, you're on top of the second largest reservoir in the state overlooking Lake Orville. Show us what's going on there. Explain this one for us. It sounds pretty horrible.
It is horrible. It's horrible for millions of residents who rely on fresh water, and they do it based upon the reservoir system here in California. There are thousands of reservoirs across the state, and they supply not only towns, municipalities, cities, but also farmers who need this fresh water to irrigate crops and to do their work. We can actually show you right now what's happening at this reservoir. This is the second largest, as you mentioned, in this state. It supplies fresh water to millions. You can take a look and see that almost the sort of bathtub ring effect in the middle of the lake. The water level should be much higher. You should see it on the sides there. The water would actually be in that space, but it's not, obviously, because most of the water is gone here. It should be about 80% full. Right now, it's at about 37%. That is dire for a number of reasons. If it goes any lower, it could risk a shutoff to the hydroelectric plant that this lake fuels, which means more stress on California's power grid, which is dangerous when we may be heading into a potentially dangerous fire season, but also just for the generality of it's hot and it's dry. And secondly, obviously, people need this water, especially, as I mentioned, farmers. Farmers are in a really bad way because they have to leave a lot of their crops fallow or unseeded. I spoke to a farmer in the Central Valley who said he has about a 2,000-acre farm. He's left 600 acres of that farm left unseeded. That is a huge cost to him, somewhere in the 7-figure range, and it means that he's had to already lay off about 70 workers. That could increase if this drought gets worse and the year goes on and it gets hotter and drier as it's expected to. Here's what he said about the fear of that. Listen to what he said.
I'm pretty scared this year, actually, yes, because we've never been in this kind of uncertainty before. I probably can't do this again next year. I can't do it again. It's too tough.
A lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty. He's lucky in the fact that he diversified early. So he has a number of different crops that he could use, some that don't need as much water as others. So he has the ability to do that. And also, he's getting some of his water shipped in from other farms across the state that have more water. But some farms obviously have one crop and aren't able to do that. And even with him doing that, there's still just not enough water to go around. It is a real crisis that starts at the farm and will probably end up at the table. Allison?
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, Steve, because we know how important California is as a producer for this country. The Central Valley grows more than a third of the vegetables in the entire U.S., plus 2/3 of the fruits and nuts. I mean, what kind of supermarket shortages or shortages could we be looking at because of that? Should shoppers start getting concerned?
Yeah, fruits, berries, nuts, essentially all the artichokes you eat, all the almonds you eat come from California. So It's a huge deal. It's too early to tell whether or not this is going to cause, complete shortages in the grocery store a few months from now, simply because it's not obviously the harvest for a lot of these crops. But the farmer I spoke to, Joe Del Bosque, he was in that clip that you just saw, basically said that there is no way to avoid this if this goes on like it does. And this could last not only the next few months, but years and years and years. There's no way you won't feel the pain at the grocery store as those items become more limited, because again, they all come from the same place. That's what people need to realize. So if they don't get the water, we don't get the crops, we don't get the groceries when we head to the grocery store. Allison?
Steve, last month, Governor Newsom announced $5 billion plus to deal with water infrastructure and droughts. Where's that money going, and will it help these particular farmers?
So a lot of the money is going into what's called groundwater management. In other words, the way municipalities handle how they allocate the resource of water, which is so key, so important. That will help. It also does provide some financial assistance for farmers. What it doesn't have, according to the farmer I spoke to, again, Joe, he said there isn't particular infrastructure for water storage. In other words, they aren't building more of these basins, more of these reservoirs that can hold water, so something like this doesn't happen again. That's the number one thing I've heard from farmers, especially in the Central Valley, where the access is much more limited. They want more actual structures built to hold water so they don't have to borrow from other parts of the state, so they can avoid this limited, sort of resource that's now going on and will continue to go on as we move into what's going to be probably a pretty difficult wildfire season as well. Allison?
Yeah, Steve, it's horrible to think that it's just early June and they're dealing with all that already. Steve Patterson, thank you so much. It's time for the bottom line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. Today, a growing divide between companies and their employees. More workers admitting they are in no rush to get back to the office after working from home for more than a year. So how do businesses find a balance that works for everyone? Here's NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson.
Hey there, Allison. So some of the recent polling on this shows 1 in 4 employees would rather keep working remotely full time. But the question now is whether their bosses will actually let them, with some companies looking to get staffers back at their desks and making it mandatory.
I don't know how to remove it.
From video conferencing mishaps and Zoom fatigue to sweatpants and an easy commute, many Americans have found working from home a mixed blessing. Some eager to go back, others feeling a little like this.
No, God!
Bloomberg reporting a survey of 1,000 adults showed 39% would consider quitting if their employees were not flexible about remote work. And some may not be. Some high-profile bosses recently suggesting they're looking for employees in the office, like the head of JP Morgan Chase, who's ready to say so long to video chats for good.
I'm about to cancel all my Zoom meetings. I just think I'm done with it.
In D.C., the staff of the Washingtonian magazine went on a short strike after its publisher wrote an op-ed suggesting corporate managers have a strong incentive to demote employees who choose to keep working from home. There may be a generational divide, too. Bloomberg reporting millennials and Gen Z feel more strongly about remote work flexibility. One worker saying they feel like we're not working if they can't see us. It's a boomer power play. In hard-charging Silicon Valley, a back-to-work backlash brewing at Apple, with some employees upset they'll have to return to the office 3 days a week starting in September, according to a Verge report. Lindsay Duran, chief marketing officer at Zilliant, believes office incentives could help make the transition easier, which is partly why her company's restarting their Taco Tuesday tradition.
Some work activities in particular are easier to do in person, such as brainstorming on a whiteboard. For example, that's a bit more difficult over a Zoom call or a Teams meeting.
So for those people who are going back to work, the offices may look different in some ways, maybe not in others. You've got some places who hope it'll actually feel a little bit more like pre-pandemic times with things like happy hours or Taco Tuesdays, like you just heard. But some companies might choose to keep certain safety precautions in place. Employees might see staggered scheduling or seating. I hate to say it, but Teams or Zoom is probably not going to disappear for good or disappear altogether, but the shared office birthday cake might, Allison, at least the blowing out of candles, depending on people's comfort levels.
All right, let's bring in two ladies who know how the pandemic is affecting working women, co-founders and CEOs of The Skimm, Carly Zakin and Danielle Weisberg. Carly, Danielle, it is so good to see you guys. The last time I interviewed you, I was a local news reporter. You guys were working with an intern in an office the size of a closet. We could barely fit in it.
Yes.
Man, things have changed.
We were wondering Yeah, going back to work there, the decisions were a lot easier than what we're facing now.
Yes, all three of us do not want to go back to work. Easy decision made. So let's talk about how things have changed this year for women. You co-wrote an op-ed out today called From She Session to Her Turn, creating a great return for millennial women. Writing, like us, people throughout the country and the world are preparing to go back to the office after a year and a half of drastic global and personal change. This should be our great return. But many people, women in particular, are understandably anxious about returning to the office in its old ways. So, Carly, let me start with you. I think any of us who've spent the last year working from home are feeling some of that. If not, they're about to. So let me ask you first about your personal experience with this and then what you're hearing from other working women.
Absolutely, Allison. So first of all, thank you for having us. But, this year obviously has been so unique and in so many different ways. Danielle and I have been talking nonstop. When we first went home for the pandemic, Danielle, I think you were 9 weeks pregnant. Nobody knew you're going to come back to work now with a 2-month-old. We both ended up living with family, trying to make it work, and also looking at our employees. 80% of our team is women. We're watching, our C-suite balancing, answering homework questions while making lunch, while leading an exec team. So it's been amazing to watch how, not only the Skimm team, but also women across the globe have rallied to make it work. But I think as we all think about what it means to go back to work and what that looks like, we are really troubled by the idea of calling something the great return, because it implies that we want to go back to how things were. And as women are all too well aware, things weren't so great for us. We were still fighting the wage gap. For women of color, they're still fighting so many more challenges. And what we really see is an opportunity for us to think about, it's her turn. Let's not call it the return. Let's call it her turn. And what are the policies that need to exist to create the work environment for her?
Well, especially like you three.
Yeah, we all might want to leave the sweatpants and go back, but we might not want to go back to the same old. So Danielle, let me ask you, the Skimm's primary audience are millennial females. You surveyed that group just to get a sense of how they're dealing with the pandemic. What did they tell you? What did you hear from them? What are their biggest concerns? What have they been voicing?
Yeah, it's been really tough. This is an audience that is getting hit with basically taking care of both their parents and also their kids who haven't been in school, their kids who are struggling, and women who are struggling with their own mental health and their own health in general. We see that a lot of them have gone into therapy. A lot of them have thought about changing their own careers. A lot of them have reconsidered their careers. They've lost their jobs, and women are taking on the burdens of helping what's going on in the household. They are the ones coaching their kids through this change. For an already stressed out demographic, none of this has helped. It's only made it worse. We've all seen what the unemployment numbers have looked like for women. None of this is good. And when you go back to 2007, 2008, people, although I didn't hear this term widely used, it was the man session. And so now we're looking at a she session. It's disproportionately affected women, especially women of color. We've had to make tough, if not impossible, decisions that are falling on women, and we need long-term decision. And we're seeing what's coming out in the conversation as being looking at the Biden administration's proposals, looking at things like the Marshall Plan for moms, looking at ideas like a caregiving czar. What we want to see at the same time is making sure that the private sector, that companies are putting out proposals or at least having conversations about what could be more helpful to give women what they need to not only come back, but to thrive. And a lot of that are things that weren't in the workplace to begin with.
Danielle, I want to ask you more about that. But Carly, first, you both wrote, with all the demands that women have faced in the past year and a half, working remotely may seem like the better alternative. But how will that work out if men who haven't taken on the same burdens go back at higher rates? I mean, let's face it. We just talked about all the ways that the pandemic hasn't helped women get ahead or close the gender pay gap. What do we risk losing if we stay at home?
We risk losing a lot. You know, obviously this past year was difficult for everyone. It was especially difficult for parents, but it was especially difficult for women in particular. And, you know, there was a study, Allison, that came out last week that said that women were more likely to want to stay remotely 5 days a week. Well, if that is the case, then what does that mean in a few years when you look at promotions in the workplace, when you look at diversity in the workplace? We've made slow but steady progress pre-pandemic around women actually getting the seat at the table, and we don't want to risk losing that. We don't want to risk that sliding backwards when it was just starting to actually see her get the seat that she deserved.
I really like it, guys.
Danielle, you mentioned this in your op-ed. You wrote there are calls for a Marshall Plan for moms and a caregiving czar. Yes, and yes, we applaud all these political efforts, but companies also need to do their part. So let me ask you, how's the Skimm doing its part? And what would you like other companies to do to help turn this she session into a great her turn?
Well, I think the first and biggest thing is to talk about it and to admit that no one wants to go back to how things were, and to start to talk about what wasn't working for women. We need to make sure that there's flexibility. Yes. We need to make sure that there is accountability at the same time. And I think that if you've proven to be able to work effectively over the past year and a half in this instability, then that should say a lot about the state of your workforce. You know, Carly and I are having conversations with our team about, of course, we want to make sure that we are continuing to give that in-person touch. There's nothing that substitutes for getting together in a room. However, we are able to do so much remotely. So taking into account a hybrid model is something that we're working on, because we don't want to fall into the trap of starting to count more for FaceTime. Who is in the office? What does that say about them? Are they the people that can come in earlier and stay later? And how is that going to have effects down the line? The other thing that I think companies should be thinking about is, what does their benefits package look like, and who is that benefits package built for? And I think that's really important. As this generation of women, we need them to stay in the workforce. We need them to make sure that they are, down the road, if they're the majority of the labor force, contributing to Social Security, that they're paying into things that are going to benefit us all as a society. And we are seeing, the ramifications of looking at declining population numbers. It is all tied together. So when you think about, at a very, very basic level, looking at how am I setting up insurance plans? How am I thinking about not only caregiving time for kids, but also, are there parents? Are there older relatives in the house who you also have to think about? All of these things really can create a comprehensive package, but you got to start from the bottom up.
Carly and Danielle, it was awesome to see you too. I hope the next time it's in person and we're talking more about the progress we've made. Thank you so much for being with us today. We'll keep this conversation going.
Thank you.
1.7 miles of urban tunnel opening in Las Vegas today. Elon Musk's Boring Company built them to transport visitors through Vegas's convention center, and they're getting a lot of attention. But engineering experts are skeptical. NBC News investigative tech reporter Surus Farvar joins me now. Surus, Musk wants tunnels like these to be part of America's transportation future. He's saying he can create them faster and cheaper than ever. But you're reporting that engineering experts aren't so sure. Why not? What's their issue here?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, Elon Musk likes to buck all kinds of trends, and here he is bucking a civil engineering trend. The engineers that I've spoken to said that, you know, he's really kind of flipped the traditional civil engineering model on its head. Traditionally, tunnels have been going bigger. For example, the project to expand the LA Metro right now, building a tunnel across Los Angeles about 9 miles to the tune of $1 billion per mile. Elon Musk says that he wants to make smaller tunnels, which in turn will be cheaper. Of course, these engineering experts also say that, you know, these smaller tunnels, by definition, will carry less people than, let's say, a subway tunnel. So that's the bet that Elon is making.
3 separate groups of elected officials from Fort Lauderdale, pretty interested here. They visited Vegas. What are they thinking about doing? What ideas do they want to bring back to Florida?
Yeah, it's interesting. I spoke with the mayor of Fort Lauderdale, Dean Trontalis, and he told me how excited he is to bring these tunnels to his city in South Florida, just north of Miami. Yes, as you say, 3 different groups of business leaders and local politicians, including the mayor, have visited Las Vegas to check out this loop, as you say, this 1.7-mile loop that is opening today for the first time at the Las Vegas Convention Center. Attendees of the World of Concrete convention can attend and go on in this tunnel. Basically, people go down into the tunnel, they hop into a Tesla, it'll take them to the convention center from one of 2 satellite parking lots. And the mayor is hoping to build a similar tunnel that would take locals and visitors from Fort Lauderdale, from downtown Fort Lauderdale, all the way to the beach, 2 and change miles to the east.
Cyrus, I understand the Musk company also came up with plans for tunnels in Los Angeles, Chicago, Baltimore. What's up with those projects? What do you know about them?
Yeah, it's interesting. So this project in Las Vegas and this, you know, possibly future project in Fort Lauderdale, you know, if the Fort Lauderdale project does get off the ground, you know, that will be different than what has happened in recent years. Ever since Elon Musk famously tweeted about his idea of tunneling and creating the Boring Company back in 2016, you know, he tweeted saying, "Traffic is driving me nuts. I'm going to build a tunnel boring machine and just start digging." And that's how the Boring Company was born. He wanted to build a couple of different tunnels across Los Angeles, one that would parallel the 405 freeway in western Los Angeles, one that would take people from an LA Metro stop to Dodger Stadium. As a Dodgers fan, that would have been pretty exciting for me. But those projects didn't come to fruition. Neither did a project in Chicago, nor a project that would connect DC and Baltimore.
It is fascinating. I'm curious to see who's right here, Elon Musk or the engineering experts. Cyrus, great to have you on again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Today, Boston Public School seniors were the stars of the game at Fenway Park. NBC News Now host Savannah Sellers was there for their Grand Slam graduation.
Hey there, so as you can see, I am right in the middle of a high school graduation happening at Fenway Park. How cool is this? Many of these students are Red Sox fans, and they get to graduate from this ballpark where their Red Sox play. You hear the music, you see the cap and gowns, you know I'm at a graduation. Now, when the Red Sox heard that Boston Public Schools were looking for a location to have these outdoor ceremonies so that they could stay safe, they thought, hey, we've got a really good one. And they approached Boston Public Schools, who were, of course, thrilled about that opportunity. The other really cool thing that's going on here today, you can actually get your shot here. Whether it's these graduates or any of their family members or guests at this particular graduation, the graduates could bring as many guests as they wanted. They can all get their shot, and when they do, they're also going to get 2 free tickets to a future Red Sox game. But there's a lot going on here in Fenway Park today. There's actually a game in just a few hours against the Astros happening, but they're still fitting this in, and it means so much to the students who have spent a year apart, either on Zoom school, they didn't have a prom. This is the first time some of them are actually seeing their friends. Listen to what some of them told me.
It was definitely a shock considering everything that's been going on the past couple months with the pandemic and everything, so I'm glad that they did get to come. It shows me and my friends have a lot of determination, you know. For us, failure, we don't see that as an option, so we all really try to strive to be.
What's it like to get to be with your friends in person after not being with them for a while?
This is the greatest moment right now of my life. Getting to be with my family, my friends, my classmates, my teachers on my birthday just makes everything even more memorable.
You can hear there how excited they are and how much it meant to them to actually, of course, get a graduation this year, unlike a lot of schools in 2020. And not only that, but get to do it in this historic place, the oldest original MLB stadium still in use, and been here since 1912. They've never had a high school graduation until today. Pretty cool for these students.
The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have a lot to celebrate this week. Meghan Markle releasing her debut children's book just days after giving birth to daughter Lilibet. Benched is about the relationship between a father and son through a mom's eyes, inspired, of course, by the bond between Prince Harry and Archie. NBC News correspondent Natalie Morales got an exclusive interview with the book's illustrator, Christian Robinson.
Hey, Allison. Well, Meghan says this book was actually inspired by a poem she wrote for Prince Harry on Father's Day, and she collaborated with Christian Robinson, a 35-year-old award-winning illustrator who has quite an inspiring story of his own. Christian says it was a very collaborative process, all while Meghan was pregnant with Lilibet. The result, a touching and sweet book that now may need a sequel.
For the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, 2 new chapters on parenting opening this week. Meghan and Harry announcing the birth of their daughter Lilibet Diana Sunday, named after the Queen's family nickname and Harry's mother, Princess Diana. And as the world waits for the first pictures of the new baby girl, new images from Meghan's first children's book celebrating fatherhood.
Pictures matter. Pictures are tools that we use to communicate.
Meet award-winning illustrator Christian Robinson. Last year, he was chosen by Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, to create the visual behind her first children's book, The Bench.
Did they say, the Duchess picked you? It's like winning the lottery.
It was more of an email, but still a very exciting email. I connected with the manuscript, and I fell in love with the story.
Tell me about your first interactions with the Duchess of Sussex.
Zoom is how we connected, and it was really surreal and exciting, and we were totally vibing on that first Zoom.
The story began as a love poem written by the Duchess to her husband, Prince Harry, for Father's Day, after the birth of their first child, Archie. The Bench, a true-to-life one.
The origin is in a specific bench that Meghan watched Harry and Archie bond on, but it was important for us both to make sure that this story connects with as many readers as possible. There's also, I guess, diversity in the types of benches that we see in this book.
The connection was different for Christian, who was raised by his grandmother.
I personally didn't have that father figure growing up, and I'm not yet a father myself. My grandmother was my caregiver.
Did you like reading a lot of children's books growing up?
I didn't find myself connected to books really, especially books that didn't have pictures. But my love for books and picture books came much later.
Those pictures turned into a passion. Drawing became a way of expression, leading to a young career as an illustrator. His mosaic work, steeped in vibrant colors, caught the attention of the Duchess. In collaboration with the Duchess, it was decided watercolor would grace the book.
There's a gentleness to this story, and I think it complements the gentle nature of watercolor. I did some little drawing of a soldier in their uniform, and she was like, but let's make sure that we actually put the patches where they're supposed to be. And so it's about really capturing that stuff authentically.
Harry and Archie appear at the beginning and the end of the book, but in between, diverse images of fathers and sons.
And what I'm really passionate about is telling those stories that are inclusive, that represent as many different types of kids as possible.
He shared some of the story, giving us some insight to his illustrations.
This is your bench where life will begin for you and our son, our baby, our Ken. This is your bench where you'll witness great joy. From here you will rest, see the growth of our boy.
And one of his favorite book moments.
It's this moment where we see a dad and a son, and they're on the bench together, and they're stretching, and they're wearing pink tutus. And I love this idea that a father, of course, is going to be supportive no matter what their child's, son's hobbies and interests are.
And did she have input in that image as well?
She immediately connected with it and loved the idea as well and said, go for it.
And Meghan's reaction of the finished book?
I got a message back that she was effusive over a lot of the images and illustrations. I had to Google what effusive meant, but it just means like really excited and appreciative.
Great praise.
And that meant everything to me. This whole process was just like a ray of light in my life. And I'm just, again, really glad I got to be part of it.
And Christian did tell us there are lots of little clues and Easter eggs throughout the book and the illustrations. For example, take a look at this drawing. You see Meghan there in the garden, but if you look even closer, you'll see a little baby's head popping out over a sling on her shoulder. So perhaps that's a nod to wanting her whole family, even her rescue chickens, to be included in the book.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.